Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patty Beasy with the National Restaurant Association. Welcome to today's presentation, Distribution and Logistics in the Age of COVID. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. Your audio is muted and your video is turned off. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will try to answer as many questions as we can. However, if we run into some time constraints, appreciate your understanding on that if we don't get to everybody's questions. This presentation is being recorded and will be distributed afterwards along with the slide deck. Please give us about a week to get that out to you all. Bear with me here. I need to put up another slide. Okay, as with all our meetings, we will comply with all antitrust law requirements. Please refer to the slide that you can see on your screen. As always, we should avoid disclosing any confidential and competitively sensitive materials that you have not shared publicly already, especially regarding pricing, costs, or similar matters. I'd now like to turn things over to John Barone to introduce the session and our panel. John?
Well, if that didn't scare everyone away, good afternoon and welcome to Supply Chain Gatherings. This is the second of 3 sessions that are being sponsored by the National Restaurant Association Supply Chain Expert Exchange. I'm John Barone, president of Market Vision, and I have the honor of being your host today. We have 2 distinguished and very experienced guests with us today. The first is Bob Sala, who is currently senior advisor at the consulting firm CEO Partners. Bob has been founder and president of the National Food Service Distribution Company, DMA, for 24 years prior to going into consulting. Funny connection between Bob and I is that I was part of a very fledgling and underfunded startup that was trying to coordinate national distribution programs about 2 years before DMA was founded. Then DMA came along, funded by a rather large group of independent distributors. So there was a time when Bob was my Darth Vader. But it was a time in the industry when Cisco was still buying up companies, US Foods did not exist yet, and the only real national distributors were Kraft Food Service and Rykoff Sexton. Yes, we are that old. Rounding out our lineup of boomers today is Terry Walsh, president of Southwest Traders. Southwest is based in Southern California with branches from the Pacific Northwest through Texas. Prior to Southwest, Terry was with Maine's Paper and Food Service in New York for 19 years and got to help that company explode from a small regional to a large multi-regional operation in the wake of the Ameriserve bankruptcy in 2000. Terry's also an IFTA board member, and he's a very proud Marine Corps veteran, which probably helped him survive a career in food service distribution. So we're going to start this thing off today with a short and very well-researched presentation by Bob, and then we'll get into a little discussion with Terry revolving the questions that came in with the registrations. So Bob, all yours.
Great, thank you, John. You know, while I'm bringing up a deck to share here, I will tell you that the music story that John brought up there is really true in the sense that goes back a ways. And John, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but when you have a startup, it really helps to be young and naive, because if I had known the headwinds facing starting DMA back in the day, I don't know. So anyway, headwinds are a pretty good segue into what we're talking about here today. And you know something, when John and I and Janet got together and tried to plan this section, was actually back in April. One of the challenges we were really having was, gosh, how do we make this topical? You know, there's a saying in supply chain that when supply chains are under pressure, change happens really fast. And that's an environment that we're in right now. So we strove really hard to try to make this topical for you and current. So what we're going to really try to get done, as John mentioned, we're going to try to give you some operator and distributor insights, share some clues to whatever we think the new normal looks like. And as John mentioned, Terry will come in and talk about some details behind that. The challenge, frankly, that we had in creating this snapshot was how to do it in a timely way. So here's what we did. Real quickly, we had the NRA, and I want to really shout out to Brandon Ray over at Brecker, who did a great job of helping to monitor the survey monkey element of this, we created just a simple 12 questionnaire, and everybody responded, or many responded, and we matched that together with some distributor interviews that I did. So I took that data from operators and just called distributors that I know. There was big ones, there were medium-sized ones, there was some system style, there was some broad line. Also talked to a couple of logistics executives as well, and then married all of that together with some good information from IFTA and Mark Allen. So what we have here is kind of a snapshot in time. It's anonymous. The people that weighed in on the restaurant side, were anonymous. So were the distributor interviews that I did. I'm the only one that knows who called who. And of course, IFTA's data was weaved into there as well. So looking at the operator survey side first, we had a really good response. It's pretty representative of the nation's restaurant news top 200 in the sense that we had respondents that came in that were a half, what I would call big chains, the top 50. And then the roughly other half were those that were smaller than that. And pretty much in this group anyway, skewed to actually the smaller. So what we have here is a set of responses that really reflect big and medium small, and with a skew to small. Service types, you can see what we got back. Distribution platforms, kind of typical. We are seeing people these days using multiple distributors rather than single distributors. And then of course, the style of distributor, broadline systems, hybrid, kind of all over the place, with the bigger systems using different types for a lot of obvious reasons. So when we got the responses back, and this information is about 2 weeks old, you just see the big, highlight there of the fill rate, which, none of us has ever seen fill rates like that before. And that's with substitutions, by the way, pretty big range reflected under there. You'll see in a minute when I talk about distributor fill rates to their distribution centers, it's about the same way, by the way. So that connects us over to the delivery short component. If it's 87%, why is that really happening, kind of thing. We just asked operators to just kind of rate the reasons, just listed them, and then just rank which ones you think were most obvious in your case. And supplier inbound became the big one, so that probably makes sense. The other one that I would just call out is that on distributor outs, a lot of that had to do with the fact that distributors probably moved more slowly to adjust their historical movement to current. And so historical started to be more like 4 to 6 weeks, and gosh, maybe even shorter than that right now. So that's adjusted. My sense is that that fill rate is actually getting better because supply is getting better. And then these adjustments to true usage is starting to square up a little bit. We asked a question about, how are you helping the distributor? How are we helping each other assure supply? And then the things that I've been hearing from a few people in the industry is that there were 4 primary reasons or ways in which people were doing that. You see them there. And I think the big trend that we're seeing happening is for a lot of people that had single sources, they kind of wish they hadn't. And so this addition of multiple suppliers, moving away from more single suppliers, having more approved suppliers maybe in the order guide than they normally would, is a way that most people appear to be working that way. We had some information on delivery windows, but I'll tell you, it was all over the place. And oh my gosh, we had so many comments about, not knowing where trucks were at or when deliveries would come for a day or two. So we didn't have many metrics around that. We also asked the question. Now, this is a high-level question, and helpfulness is a big, broad term for sure, but it was a short survey, and we just wanted to know, if I caught you at a bar at the NRA and just asked you, hey, how's your distributor doing in terms of helpfulness, what would you say? And I guess as a former distributor, I'm happy to see that generally it was pretty good. 9 out of 10 or so said that their distributor, during all of the issues going on with COVID, were either very helpful or moderately helpful. Now, the surprising element on that one for me was that normally I would expect to see the bigger systems who have a lot of the spend in a distribution center getting all the attention. I would expect them to say, yeah, my distributor was helpful, etc. I found the opposite to be true there. The data that came in, it actually shows that the smaller systems, smaller chains out there found and rated their distributors to be very helpful. a lot behind that. We wouldn't have time to probably get completely into that now, but when you think about it a bit, there was some rational reasons. So connecting that dot for a minute, along with smaller systems, when we asked the question, in your supply chain department, did you reduce staff, expand, did you do nothing? So the bulk of people said, we're basically doing, having what we had before. And this is total supply chain, not necessarily just distribution FTE, right? So the surprising thing here too was that the smaller systems actually were the ones that reported reductions in their supply chain staffs. I don't know about you, but the systems that I know are on the smaller end have maybe 1 to 5 people, maybe, in their supply chain departments. So you take out 29, take out a headcount of 1 person, and that's a pretty big number. It surprised me a little bit, but obviously they're, coping and I hope doing well. But so we then went on and we asked, what did you learn and what are longer term concerns? So on the learning side, what we heard was that obviously the dual supplier thing, and that was mentioned pretty often as a wish I had more kind of thing. And then people talked a lot about relationships. We always talk a lot about relationships, but in food service, we don't have a lot of systems necessarily to count on across a supply chain. So we really count on those relationships a lot. And a lot of people reflected on the fact that, boy, I'm glad I knew so-and-so here or so-and-so there because I was able to get something done that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to. And then I think this notion of better supply chain visibility would have helped me as things changed over time through the supply chain. One of the executives mentioned to me, I love this description of the environment that we're going on right now. I had somebody tell me that, Bob, what our industry is going through right now in our supply chain is a lot like one really big limited time offer, one really big LTO. And if you think about that, all of the demand wooziness around an LTO, manufacturers not sure how much to produce, distribution centers have the wrong stuff in the wrong places. It's a great description of where we're at. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we just don't have good demand-driven systems that will give us a heads up on what's coming down the pipeline from a consumer's perspective. So it's unique to us, and that came up a lot. Looking ahead, as these are pretty big issues, and some of these will be dealt with by Janet and Beth in October with the conference that are going there. But this is a pretty daunting job. I had a mentor some years ago that once said to me, Bob, when there is chaos, there is career opportunity. And I would just point out that while that looks like a pretty daunting list, I think some careers will really be made on how well the supply chain management profession deals with these. So many years, John and I were talking about it a while ago. We've been trying to say, hey, this profession needs to be getting more respect, if you will, and maybe have a seat at the table in bigger places, whatnot. Well, it's showtime, folks. We have a chance to show what we can do. So let me move over to distribution for a minute. Just one big snapshot of the community. And to highlight, the headline on this slide would say, we appear to have pretty good distribution capacity out there right now in the midst of COVID and what looks like the future. This surprises me a little bit because I was one of those guys that when I saw the haircut that this industry was taking, especially at the independent operator level and shutting down schools and transportation and hospitality, I was completely blown away by the fact that many people would survive it all, but they did. And we didn't see a big rash of distributor bankruptcies. We didn't see fire sale acquisitions at all. People found ways to pivot and survive. Government helped with that, but the industry survived pretty well. It's a leaner industry for sure, but I think if you're a chain operator and you're wondering about capacity, I think things look pretty good. On the financial side, and the way that I would think about financials from a distribution perspective for chain operators, to think about margins and then cost to serve. So on the margin side, pretty much holding, but I think that's because we haven't quite built in some of the cost to serve elements of transportation and warehouse costs. And when those start coming into play in a more, full-blown way, as companies like Terry really staffs up full-time and whatnot, it would appear that down the road, as contracts renew, that we're going to see distributors really remodel their cost to serve models, and we'll see some margin increases come along with that, price increases coming along with that. On the inbound side, there's the fill rate number, the on-time delivery number laid into distribution. The one thing that I would call out on this slide is that quadrant on the bottom left, is that the inbound trans cost is one that we're looking at a lot right now. And the 20% is more of arranging freight on kind of a national carrier basis that you would do. The 50% increase area, that range is more on the spot market for arranging transportation. So it's a big range there, but this is a growing piece of the cost perspective. On the plant and equipment side, it's hard to get equipment right now on the new equipment for transportation. On the warehousing side, I was talking to a distributor executive last week who's building a warehouse, and he's really struggling with costs on materials that are 2, 3, 4, 5x what they were pre-COVID. And that's, of course, if you can get the labor and you can get the places put up. So I think we'll see more capacity come on, but we're going to have to deal with that a little bit more down the road. On the labor side, Terry's going to talk a bit about this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it right now, but we do have, a number of positions open across the seas, and this is, across the industry. This is IFTA's numbers. But the distributors that I interviewed actually are getting closer to running what they believe is capacity at their current volume level. So this is getting better. For those that have been to the NRA supply chain executive study group things the last couple of years in Chicago, knows that I've been on the program 2 out of 3 years talking about drivers. COVID made it worse. We've got a really big challenge here where pay is an issue for sure, but that's rising. But the job is one that is just not as attractive as it is in some other industries. By the way, that chart in the middle is a couple of years old in Tarkin and Mark Allen. That food service driver rate is more like 72,000 on average right now, which does compare pretty good to other industries. But I think you'll hear Terry and some other people say that the numbers they really use are quite higher than that. But we'll hear more about that in a minute. On food costs. So when Ron and I do consulting projects, we normally, for those systems, and they're a little bit of the medium to bigger size systems, would normally look at a $35 case cost on average, and the components of cost landed to a restaurant would have these parts to it. And about those ratios, by the way. The one that's interesting is the inbound side, which is the trans cost to the distribution center. In recent years has been rising from maybe 4 to 5% to now we see is about 8. So these are big averages, national averages for sure, but when you think about food costing and how you might model it, if you're being asked to do so, we think of it that way. And then we ask operators and distributors to take their cut on what they thought those components would be. So it's a modeling exercise that you might want to use to figure out where they're. Now, John, this is kind of in your lane a little bit. Would you add any context here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, capacity and labor issues are the number one problem up and down the supply chain. It doesn't matter if it's raw ingredients at the commodity level, transportation, processing, distribution, and at the store level. But I believe this burst of post-pandemic consumer enthusiasm is going to start to fade by year's end, and things will start to balance out a little bit better. Low to middle income Americans will have spent most of their stimulus money probably by the end of the summer. Federal unemployment benefits look to be ending in September. This segment will be back to pre-pandemic levels or worse by fall. For middle to upper income Americans who were most likely to keep their jobs and work from home, and who accumulated the bulk of the country's savings, and who benefited the most from the stock market and real estate markets, there's a boatload of savings sitting there, and big questions on how or if that's going to get spent. So most of the inflation talk is centered around that money and stimulus, further stimulus down the road in the economy. I think some of it's going to be an earlier route to retirement for some people. Demand for new cars, boats, vacation homes is going to stay high. In restaurants, that upper income and middle upper income, likely to upscale from takeout to white tablecloth sit down. For QSR and fast casual, the bad news is that it all means probably return to pre-pandemic sales levels in 2022, or maybe a little bit better with a full employment economy. We're better equipped to service that work from home crowd. The good news is on the operations and the supply chain side, there should be a little bit more sanity regarding staffing and capacity issues, more automation everywhere, and which should help with fewer bodies and rising labor costs. On this food cost piece, in terms of commodity prices, it's really, really hard to say at this point. There's some structural issues with beef that could last a few years. Shaping up to be a dry summer for the corn crop. Chinese buying of soybeans, pork, and corn continues to inflate prices. But bullish commodity issues were here pre-COVID and became critical when production slowed down or was shut down. They had the JBS hack, added a little bit more fuel to the fire. And green energy means that biodiesel production and soy oil prices will likely stay elevated. But the good news is despite high feed costs, higher meat prices are translating into record profits for a lot of protein suppliers, especially on the poultry side. So they're going to be very motivated to get back up to speed as soon as possible. So that doesn't answer a lot of commodity questions going forward. There's so many variables in play, but I think the bottom line is we need to get through this year, get past capacity issues, get past this big bump or surge in demand, and I think next year will be at least much easier to manage. So let's get into, there we go, Bob. And I'm going to start with some of the pre-submitted questions and some of the themes of the questions that people had wanted to talk about. And so Terry, aside from the driver issues which predate the pandemic, when do you see some sense of normality returning to the distribution size of the business in terms of capacity, warehouse labor issues, and product shortages?
Well, like you, John, I think by the end of the year and the fourth quarter, we'll see clearly some stabilization, right? This event that we were at a critical stage with labor before COVID, as you know, the drivers, but it wasn't just drivers. In the last 2 years, it's become the warehouse as well. And that whole working class of the industrial athlete, which we look to recruit, has been a challenge. And this has been a tipping point. And for me, the clarity we'll have by the fourth quarter is how much we're going to have to increase pay by. Because there's two things our guys and girls worry about. And number one is actually quality of life. That has taken over. And if you talk to any warehouse manager veteran, he'll tell you about the folks not wanting as much overtime. Back 15 years ago, they wanted all the overtime. So now much more important to have work-life balance. So that brings into the equation weekends and the ability to not have to work on the weekends. And then the labor for us, those are a pipe dream, those wages that Bob showed. We're in California, we'll be at least $100,000 a year for a driver. And the question becomes, is that 4 or 5 days a week? And those wages, we're thinking that's going to be the right spot. It'll be our second adjustment during this period that we have to make. And for the warehouse, probably when the typical warehouse associate, somewhere around 50, we're going to have to be, and without overtime. So you're up in the low 20s for an hourly rate. And so this thing of going out to the outside for these people, for us, we're looking internally, and we're a family-owned business. We're moving from founder-led to founder-inspired. I have 4 second generation involved in the business, Division I athletes that are all fully engaged and really engaged with the associates, which are an important part, and promote from within. So we have senior leaders started out as drivers in warehouse that know the business. So it's the folks that are coming in the door as order selectors, making them your drivers, because we have a higher retention rate, a higher success rate with our guys that were taken, girls that were taken out of the driver warehouse ranks. They know the product, they know how to handle it. Now you teach them how to drive a truck. Straight trucks, we're doing a lot more straight trucks than we ever did. Both B routes, B and C drivers. And all that does is create a ladder to the A. So all of these things are coming together. I think it's pretty clear to us. We're going to have to be at 150. We're going to have to get work-life balance, figure out the schedule. So we're really focused on developing our own, instead of you go to the outside and, you know, another distributor picks off one of your drivers and then you take one of theirs. It's, you know, grow your own. So that's where we're at.
So the work-life balance thing, is that generationally with the younger group coming in, or you're seeing that across the board?
Yeah, well, you know the term, right? Okay, boomer.
Yeah.
I think all the boomers that are managing, there was a disbelief period where I can't believe these guys don't want overtime. Now they're telling me they don't want overtime. They don't want to work the weekend. So if you're a chain and can avoid deliveries on Saturday and Sunday, you're going to be very attractive to do business with, because, oh my God, well, the order selectors and drivers will want to be on that business.
So, Terry, have you seen deliveries from your suppliers gradually improving, or are we still running into some bigger issues?
Without a doubt. You know, the one good thing is, and this is what I'm telling everybody I'm working with, is that this, please God, never happens again. And this experience over the last year and adjusting to it, the customers have been phenomenal to that we're working with. We have some that rationalized and that exited our service, but the ones that stayed with us, supportive, especially when it comes to shrink and going long on inventory and taking care of those issues, the communication about which restaurants are open, which are closed, and moving through and making sure that we were adjusted there. Some interesting things that happened to our business, our accounts receivable current highest level it's ever been, which is really good. Our record low, slow and dead inventory. Now, a little bit of that, everybody's buying everything now, but slow and dead. During this period, our service levels reached their highest levels. And that was because as you adjusted, any distributor knows you got to adjust your routes and your number of people that are coming in based on your case volume. And the folks coming in are your veterans and the folks that know the culture and refocus the whole business on the core performance. And we're holding on to that as the business returns.
So you would say that your service levels to customers are back to pre-pandemic levels?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We had the inbound, different story. The vendors, it's unheard of, right? And where before, if it was an out of stock, a little bit of everybody's hair on fire. There's intensity, a sense of urgency. And it's like, dude, we're out of stock. I don't know when we're going to get it back. And there's not like panic in anybody's voice with that. And as a result, when you looked at the numbers, 170 to 280 basis points of vendor outs. I mean, is just unimaginable. That was at its peak. We've seen in the last 6 weeks that trending down in a very favorable direction. A little bit disposables is of course a challenge category, but we're a third of that, probably around 50 to 70 basis points. And this is overall, there's a wide variety. And for us as the distributor, during COVID, it was an absolute learning curve because it was last week's sales that you were cutting this week's POs on because you didn't want to, you had all this inventory and you had 300 days on hand. You went from 19 days on hand to 300. So it was interesting. We, in early March, when we saw the demand make its first kind of material jump up, we had some out of stocks, but we transitioned back to our software. We have Blue Ridge SCP, and once that gets into a regular cadence, that does all the buying with the algorithms. And we're not 100% back, but we're pretty close to that. And the purchasing out of stocks are, again, for us, very rare. And the vendors are getting better. So I see that as trending very favorably. And again, the fourth quarter, everything being back to normal, and hopefully with the disposables to get these Oakland and the Long Beach ports moving again. So, we're feeling very optimistic about how things are trending and the business returning. Different segments may see different levels of recovery, and we're prepared for that. We're right now, if you ask my management team what they're doing and what they've been doing for the 120 days, because when we saw the spike in March, we immediately adjusted the staffing and labor and bringing in people. We have a ton of extra people and our labor is super heavy right now. And the reason that we went heavy is California, we don't only have this unemployment issue, which goes away. And I know we're going to see a better applicant flow come October when that federal benefit gets exhausted. But California has 2 weeks of COVID leave that they gave everybody in January. Our associates had named it COVIDcation. So they're taking it. They can take it incrementally. It's a nightmare. Nightmare. That all it does for us is it adds probably at each center about 20 to 30 call-offs per week more, where they're calling to use up their time that they feel they're entitled to. So to be ready for those call-offs, and that gets exhausted in the end of September. So federal unemployment insurance subsidy gone, COVIDcation gone, and come October, we're going to be sitting where we have really solid competitive wage that we think will retain our folks. Drivers making 100, 105,000, order selectors making 50. And we're going to just have to manage. The real difference for us will be managing the overtime. Because that when you make that adjustment to their wages to get them, you don't have any room to not manage that tightly.
So Terry, would you say there are different delivery expectations at the customer level, more flexible delivery windows, assistance may be unloaded, just happy to have product show up?
Well, yeah, it maybe last April, but the customers we have, they're back to normal. Okay. And some of them haven't changed their expectations at all. And there's a relationship that is absolutely, we're going to respond to that. So I think, the delivery expectations, what I'm seeing is what are we going to do to help them innovate to, overcome the driver issue? And the autonomous vehicle comes up, and that autonomous vehicle is interesting. They're too simple. The leader is right down the road from us in San Diego. We've worked with them. We didn't have them move a lane because they're not allowed to do it in California. But that vehicle that they're working on with all of those sensors isn't due to full production until 2025, and it still needs a driver. So it's not going to there's no solution. It'll make driving easier, but it won't replace our driver, the last mile, navigating tight parking lots. I don't think that's in my lifetime that I'm going to see the autonomous, but definitely on the inbound, that should help. And I think we're watching that very closely. We regularly meet with Too Simple. There's food service folks that are doing lanes. If you're in Phoenix and going to El Paso, Texas, I think they're running lanes there for them. So there's a lot of very encouraging things. We are refreshing our automation strategy. Historically, there was a time where mechanization was something that people took seriously. Some pretty large, well-respected independents did it, but then it became all of the SKUs and the different drop sizes. It took away its value and its ROI. But now there's these automation targeting parts of your process where it can be layered in. And in some cases, to me, what will be the big thing is, are we moving for an ROI, which has historically been the reason that it hasn't replaced the good old sweat and labor of these industrial athletes, to that we want to eliminate that job. And it costs a little bit more, but you don't have to worry about filling that position.
So Terry, real quick, someone asked, what's a straight truck?
Yeah, straight truck's just a smaller 26-foot truck. There's 3 different licenses. Everybody on this call has a C license, and there's bobtail trucks that you can drive with just a C. You got to be very selective because we've learned the hard way. Not everybody can drive those. And then there's a B truck, which requires a CDLA license. That's 26 foot. And then there's the tractor trailer, which is the CDLA. So if you want to think about it wage-wise, A guy's making about 100, the B guy's making about 75, and the C guy's making 65.
And I always understood it straight as one piece as opposed to multiple piece trucks,
Right,
tractor and
right.
trailer. Okay.
Yeah.
So listen, I've talked to a lot of people on the supplier side of the business, in relations to, some of the virtual things we've done over the past years. And during the pandemic, it seemed like the manufacturers that were hedged with business in both retail and food service did okay. But if they were 100% food service, they really suffered. How bad was it on the distribution side of the business last year? And what steps did your company take to survive? And I guess along with that goes, how did the street versus the chain or corporate operator perform for you during the downturn?
Well, let me caveat with our street customer is a specialty frozen dessert. So it's not like a traditional restaurant, but in April, it was complete shock and bewilderment. We were 85% unfavorable. And you're just sitting there going, what is going on? And nobody knows. And closing down and this whole nightmarish. And I had mentioned before, Our owner, Ken Smith, Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, had strong culture. He was a Division I full ride scholarship to LSU for wrestling, started the business. That's in the culture, and to respond, to dig in and just make the adjustments. So we furloughed a ton of warehouse, a ton of drivers, really good people, kept their benefits, told them that as soon as business came back, we were bringing you back. With some customers that continued to pay us, we kept them coming to work. We kept them engaged in different cleaning activities and training activities. As the business returns, we brought back the people. So that was probably the most critical aspect, was making those adjustments. We did for our senior leadership team. And I think this is a trend throughout the country. We lightened up by maybe 15, 20%, and we're not adding that back. So it just was a structural change that, you know, at the moment when you hired, you thought you was needed, and now we got along and we're getting along without it. And that's also an important part. So an adjustment to the shared service of about 15%, the refocusing on the core leaders in the warehouse, and the drivers focused on the service level when they came back. And that was kind of a refresher on the importance of that to our customer. And, you know, one of the things that we're doing, because of this connection to the warehouse associate, to become a driver, to become a manager, because there's a ladder of going from a driver right into leadership in our position or in our structure. I lost my train of thought. But they're, you know, bringing them in and ensuring, customer, the GMs. We're doing a pilot down in SoCal where we're going to bring the GM in and talk to the order selectors. And the order selectors know this is a GM, this is your customer coming in, and he's going to talk to you about how his day goes or her day goes if they do their job right, and how it goes if they do their job wrong, and not be negative. They've got these GMs with great personality that know what they're getting into. And so it'll be interesting. I think it'll be very positively received that, you know, our leadership team tells them the consequence for a mispick, or letting the damage go, or scanning it and not getting it on the pallet and the customer gets a short. And, you know, the impact that has on the GM, the restaurant, the customer, but letting them hear from the customer directly that there's somebody on the other end. We're pretty excited about that.
So let's get out of the way one of the more difficult topics and talk about business rationalization. Pandemic has caused a lot of people to look at their businesses with a much sharper financial focus. How did that play out at Southwest?
Well, we actually did it before COVID. We were fortunate that we've grown with several prominent brands and needed to take out some of the cases that we were dealing with. So it starts with the math exercise. What are the drop sizes? What are the big picture? What is the gross profit per year from that customer? What is the total case fee dollars coming from that customer? What is their drop size? What are their cases per mile? What is their SKU count? What's their on-hand inventory? How much effort does it take? How are they to deal with? Are we chasing them to pay for expired product, or is everything an argument and a fight? Do we do KBRs with them? You know, do we do a KBR where we review the business? Do we do any collaborative planning where we're forecasting, especially for LTOs? And so, you know, it became an easy one for us. They were specialty chains that we were covering a broad area. And, you know, they had to go to another distributor, and I sense that they're probably paying a lot more. And maybe if they had decided to do that, they wouldn't have had to make the change. But they're, you know, it comes down to that. It does start with the business itself, but then it gets into how is it to deal with on a day-to-day.
So
Life's
maybe
too short to be miserable having to deal with your customers, right? So
So you're saying now's not the time to sell a single franchise in Casper, Wyoming?
right. Well, those guys, that was very interesting because I can have a tendency to not be as diplomatic as I should be. And the Kenny Smith, the son, the oldest of the founder's son, took me to meet this guy in San Diego that was doing these automated frozen yogurt machines. And he wanted to be a national supplier, get like top of the line service, like he was in the top 10. And, you know, where are your locations? Oh, well, I'm working on one in Oklahoma and I got 3 in Florida. And I was like, dude, how about San Diego and LA? What do you got there? Because that's where I can really deliver a lot of stuff for you. So yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. So, you know, also on the manufacturer side, I want to mention that there's a process called SKU rationalization. If you've got slow moving private label product, nobody wants that at the manufacturer or the distributor level. There's been a lot of pressure on that lately. If you have a difficult to produce or labor intensive product, you're likely in danger of losing your source of supply right now or paying a lot more for it. I know of some mid-tier chains that have gotten 30 days notice from big name suppliers that they will no longer be making certain products, including signature products. So
Wow.
it's a very, very interesting world we live in right now. So let's quickly, we're going to have to pick up the pace here to get a few more of these questions in, but we've had big run-ups on inbound freight costs on one side, higher fuel costs and driver salaries on the outbound side. Are distributor surcharges coming back? You know, how are those cost increases going to be passed along to the customer?
Well, you know, for us, it's an annual review of our customer on what was our pro forma, what was the business model at, where are we at, and what are we going to do to go forward? There's, you know, there's the frequency of delivery can have an adjustment instead of, you know, necessarily increasing the cost. Managing that freight, one of the opportunities for a distributor in this environment with inbound freight is the capacity of their trucks returning empty. Now, the downside of that are drivers hate backhauls. So you got to give them more money to go get them. If you can get the vendor that makes sure they're not waiting at the dock to pick it up, that they can get in and get out, it's quick money. So there's other alternatives to just the fee increase, but it may be the fee that needs to be increased.
So you're gonna, yeah,
John, I might just add to that I think I've been seeing more in recent years, kind of automated pickups or adjustments in the contracts that you look over a period of 4 or 5 years and now you kind of make this judgment that if metrics move one way or the other, kind of think Terry's talking about is right, but a lot of contracts lately just have automated remedies in them, you know, with some triggers around them to just account for some adjustments in the financial model. That requires a bit of, I wouldn't call it pure open book, but it requires some recognition, as Terry kind of talks about, you know, understanding the relationship, understanding the adjustments that are required to keep the metrics and the financials working.
Which perfectly leads into our next question is, how can customers better understand your cost components, your business model, so they can become a more efficient customer with a lower cost basis? So, you know, how do we educate a customer to be able to get his best deal on the distribution side?
Terry, you want me to take that one first?
Sure.
So I'll tell you something. You know, gosh, you're starting to move into the area here, John. And the question is more on strategic relationships, which I would kind of call those. It's been my experience that the more open I became as a distributor with my financials and what I needed, and the more real that it became and understood, that sometimes there was more resistance to actually acting upon it because sometimes the adjustments required in that transparency, if cases fall off, so there's an automated kind of remedy of margin increase that's required. The ability to sell that internally within that brand and in that supply chain department, if the culture is not right, is not so easy. You'll start to hear, well, I see the model, I love the transparency, but operations will never buy that. I can't sell that to the C-suite, right? So the cultural aspects of really understanding what that really means, and then having good strategic mechanism partnerships around that model really make it work better.
One of the topics or questions that came up repeatedly in our surveys was the value of relationships. And, you've already addressed, not only the strategic partnerships or relationships with your suppliers and distributor, but I think what happened during COVID is people didn't realize how valuable their peer-to-peer relationships were and be able to dig up dirt and maybe get some insights on where they could find something they couldn't find. Terry, does it come down to the size and profitability of an account, or is there any advantage to really having a more personal or more strategic relationship with your company?
Oh yeah, the personal part for me, I think I'm a little bit biased because I was on the IFTA board for 10 years. I rejoined again this year. And really got great value out of learning from peers in that. And I started the supply chain leader, inviting them to that with me. And then because they really only need to go once, but what they're going to see at these solutions conference is the whole world from our view, and out on the floor, the actual equipment, straight trucks, every kind of trailer, all the tools of a warehouse person, all the tools of a delivery driver are there, and going through, and there's workshops where practitioners are talking about the problems that recruiting, holding on to drivers, paying them, and seeing these groups. It's inspiring because we're a small industry, and there's a lot of very good educational opportunities. And then I saw the supply chain leader delegate that down to other levels below them. So the more people go and use it as a kind of a career development understanding, especially if somebody's coming in to food service supply chain outside of the industry, that they're coming from, a retailer to food service. And this helps to really highlight the differences.
So, we're unfortunately out of time. I think we're over time by a bit. So let me see if I can make you guys smile once before we leave, discuss the future of distribution. This is such a difficult business. And I can remember from my own experience, this is one of my favorite stories. I'm sitting in a meeting of IHOP franchise operators, a regional meeting, Boston, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Washington, Baltimore markets, all represented in one room, trying to consolidate distribution for the Northeast. At one point in the debate, a franchisee from the Bronx stands up, and I quote, says, "These distributors, they all suck, but these guys, they suck less." So, by the way, this is considered a compliment in the New York area, especially regarding distribution. So, Bob, Terry, given the critical service levels, required for your customers' operations in the future, can we hope to aspire to more than just we suck next to the last guy?
I think we're there now, John. I think we're there now. The future looks good.
Terry, any last comments before I sign
I
off?
think that, we're, as an industry, we're working hard. I know there was a question on the Drive Smart Act, which allows 18-year-olds to get a CDLA license and go cross country. We're working hard as an industry group to make that happen. And on the traceability, it's a nightmare. These new traceability guidelines are ridiculous. And we, as an industry, IFTA wrote a 10-page paper. Gordon's has been leading the effort as a member of IFTA to educate FDA, their food safety person, on how crazy and cumbersome these new rules are. The FDA didn't change them, but they agreed to these listening sessions. We just gave the East Coast, we're giving the West Coast, we're pushing back because those new regulations are a nightmare. And
are we being more regulated or
more
same?
For traceability?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
for tomatoes down to anything with that as an ingredient, you need to be able to trace it. The list of traceability items, you could spend a whole hour just on that topic. It's a nightmare. To me, the IFTA has always come through in the past at beating some sense in with our message to the FDA to make this more reasonable. We're 100% on board with traceability and the ability to do recall, but this is a major overreaction and just going to add cost to the system.
All right, guys, we're on a stop dead right now. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have one more gathering scheduled. The next one is on August 17th. It will feature a presentation by Michael Zur, the chief economist and analytics lead at Cargill. That next session, we should get more answers, at least some more educated speculation on what's going on with the economy, manufacturer capacity, and commodities for next year. And both the NRA Supply Chain Expert Exchange and the Market Vision conferences will both be live again this October in Orlando. Keep an eye out for registration information. And that's all for today. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to Bob and Terry for a great presentation. Goodbye for now.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
John.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.